Good afternoon. Today I have the lovely Brian with me. Hiya, Brian. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi Donna. Yes, I'm Brian Price. I'm excited at the publication of my first novel, Fatal Trade, which comes out on Tuesday. But I'm also the author of Crime Writing, How to Write the Science, which is a book that helps crime writers avoid some of the mistakes which hitherto have often cropped up. So I advise people personally. I've got a website which has tips on things like poisons, firearms, knocking people out and body disposal, all the sort of wherewithal a crime writer needs, really.
Have you always wanted to write?
I've always wanted to read. I remember starting my first crime reading was the Leslie Charteris Saint books, which I started when I was about 10. And I read a lot of crime and spy stuff. Switched a bit to fantasy in the late 60s when it was popular. Still reading the odd crime novel and then sort of coming back to it. But where I first started writing was in the environment field. I was involved with Friends of the Earth. They wanted a short book on pollution, and I was advising them on pollution at the time. So I produced a slim volume called The Friends of the Earth Guide to Pollution, which was quite well received. And a few years later, I wrote a book called C for Chemicals with a friend of mine, following on from the popular book E for Additives. So it seemed like the sort of alphabet thing was working, and followed it up with P for Pollution. And those were popular books, aimed at people who were interested but didn't have any particular expertise. I then became an environmental consultant and wrote a number of technical reports on things like biotechnology, energy from waste, coal combustion and stuff. But they were not the kind of things you'd find on a Smith's bookstall. They were limited circulation and so on. But it was, I suppose, getting involved with Crime Fest in 2016, I think. I found that the crime writing community, instead of being authors being up themselves, they were very welcoming, and they were in the bar with Ian Rankin and so on. They weren't on pedestals and the like. And I thought, well, can I help with this? I hadn't thought at the time of writing a novel. And that's why I set up my website, Crime Writer Science. And then my wife suggested turning it into a book. Well, all this contact with crime writers did make me want to start writing some fiction. I dabbled with a few short stories. And the Crime Fiction Coach website group ran a competition for the best first sentence of a novel. I competed for that. I won. Some nice chocolates and a 3 a.m. notebook, which is an essential for any writer, because those ideas that come to you in the middle of the night, you really have to write down because they're not there in the morning. And somebody said that they couldn't wait to read the rest of the book. So I really didn't have much option. I had to write it, didn't I? So I set to work and did that. Passed it around various agents and publishers, and was thrilled when Hobeck Books picked it up and felt it was worth publishing. And that's what's happening on Tuesday.
I love you, Hobeck. Yeah, I love Hobeck. They're great.
Very nice company.
Yeah. How was it writing the fiction compared to writing the non-fiction?
Well, it's very different. With the science stuff, you write in a very linear manner. You take an idea or a concept or a piece of technology, and you work through in a clear, you hope, manner so that people can understand it. You develop the principles, you explain stuff. It's pretty much a one-way thing, and you do your research because the information is out there. It's just a question of organizing it and presenting it. Writing fiction is all coming from your head. I mean, obviously there are facts about how poisons work and how police work and so on, which you've got to incorporate and get right, or at least approximately right. But as to the plots, as to what people are going to do, you're inventing people, you're inventing things that happen. And that was quite different. I'd never done that to any sort of extent before. And it was quite a challenge, especially characters, because I don't know, I now know one or two through the internet, but I didn't know any police officers at the time. I read lots of stuff and I watch lots of stuff on television, but quite a few of them bear very little resemblance to how the police really work. And as I've said with some of the science stuff, whether it's firearms or poisons or whatever, people often get things wrong. So I had to make sure I got those right. But how do you create a villain when you've not actually met any villains? You can't just transpose somebody from Goldfinger or a Peter James novel and use them. You've got to have your own villains and your own goodies as well. So yes, it was quite a challenge.
And did you enjoy the challenge though?
Yes, I did. Obviously it's hard work. It's not the kind of thing one knocks off in one's lunch break. Some people have the talent. I think Lee Child, when he was writing the Reacher books, he'd start in September, he'd sit down, he'd write and just deliver his manuscript when he'd finished and bang on deadline, without having to do a lot of revisions and going back and editing and so on. That didn't work with me because you write something and then you see whether it works. And my wife is the person who's my first editor, if you like. She tells me if it's rubbish, she tells me if it's not working, as well as spotting grammaticals and things like that. So I then go back and redo things, emphasize some bits, delete some bits, add a bit more here and there. And at the end of the process, if I've got something which when I'm reading it, and I think, well, if someone else read it, I'd enjoy reading it. I think I've done something that works.
Who was your favourite character that you wrote?
I think my favourite character is Mel Collins, the detective constable, who's the main protagonist. But I mean, she does work with other people and they have their own quirks and their interests. And I also like, the novel starts, apart from a prologue, with this chap's head being found in a cardboard box on his ex-wife's doorstep. And her response is she tries to get the police interested and they say, oh, go home and take your medication, dear, thinking she's, not well. So annoyed by this, she puts the box in a shopping trolley and carts it off to the police station, puts it on the counter and says, what are you useless buggers going to do about this? And I like that character. And then there are various other things happen to her and she turns out to be quite a fun character to write. So I like her. And there's also there's a parallel thread between Mel investigating this gang that deals in drugs and also something else, which I won't tell you about because that would be a spoiler. And the revenge to be wreaked by a former sex worker in Glasgow who's found her way down to Mexton, my imaginary town, via London, tracking down the man who trafficked her. And she wreaks a revenge on him. And so there's the thread about how she works her way into this organization. And it all comes together in a denouement in a shed in a remote bit of woodland. So I've worked the threads into that.
And how did you find it choosing character names?
Well, the first one I chose for Mel Cotton, somebody already used. I think it was Mari Hanna used. I was going to call Mel Cooper, but I think it's Mari Hanna who has a Mel Cooper who's a male detective. So I thought, well, I better change her name to Cotton. But what you do, I think, I suppose most people do a due diligence check. I had a corrupt police officer of a certain rank and ethnicity and used his name. And when I Googled it, there was a far from corrupt, totally honest senior police officer of that rank and name. So I had to change his rank and name just to make sure I didn't get either arrested or sued for libel. So yeah, you check, you make sure that, I read so much crime fiction that I don't think I've copied anybody's character names. And if I have, I apologize. As for real people, I just make sure that I haven't used anybody who could be remotely mistaken for a character in the book, or indeed the sleazy pub in the book. I make sure there isn't a sleazy pub called the Fife and Drum anywhere in England anyway. So yeah, you've got to be careful. And there's Crime Fest and that you hear tales of people doing this sort of thing and perhaps mistaking it. I think Danielle Ramsey wrote a novel set in, I think, Scarborough, where she referred to a nightclub and the car somebody drove and some various activities going on. And this was her major villain. And she was contacted by the girlfriend of a very serious villain in that area who actually was recognizable in the book. So she had to make it clear that, you know, she really didn't want to end up with concrete boots or Scarborough Pier, and that it was purely fiction and that no slight was intended on this gentleman. She's still alive, so I think that must have worked.
Yeah, of course, yeah, not the sort of people you want to be upsetting.
Absolutely. I mean, you can refer to the Krays because they're dead, but any contemporary crooks you've got to be very careful about.
Yeah. Without any spoilers, what was your favourite scene or chapter that you wrote, and what was the most difficult?
I think the Denouement one was a bit difficult. I think for a couple of reasons. One of which is very many authors have their characters doing stupid things, you know, going off to interview a subject and leaving their phone in the car and not telling anybody where they've gone, and the sort of problems ensue. I had my characters doing something which they might do, because given that preservation of life is the first priority of a police officer, somebody does something involving looking to see if someone's still alive, basically, which has unfortunate consequences. And I had sort of had discussions about this. How far can you have somebody doing something a bit impulsive, which, you know, if you stood back, do a risk assessment, waited for backup, waited for firearms unit, waited for this, that, and the other, you know, what might happen? Somebody might have died on the spot. So there was that. The other part of the Denouement was fine. I had Zoe Sharp, who writes these brilliant Charlie Fox thrillers, help me with a firearms incident and how something might ricochet. So that worked okay. So that was one of the most tricky bits. I liked the scene where the Martina, the woman seeking revenge, gets away from Glasgow, and I did enjoy the starting bit, the scene with Ellen and her husband's head. You probably gather that she didn't like her husband very much. He deserted her, so she was a paramedic as well, so she's used to sort of fairly gruesome scenes, especially if she attended road traffic collisions. So I like that bit, and a lot of people like that. And people say, you know, they were hooked from that page onwards and couldn't stop reading, which is a nice compliment. It means it's working.
Yeah, a lot of people say that crime fiction writers must be weird, but I think the readers are weirder generally.
Yes.
Because we like reading about all this weird stuff that you write, and we want more. So yeah, I think we're weirder.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the psychological novels I've come across, and I tend to err on the side of some police procedurals and the sort of things that Mike Craven and Paul Finch and David Mark and that write, because of their they some of those authors, and Mike Craven doesn't. He does an awful lot of research, but some take liberties with anesthetics and so on. But again, I've helped out both David and Mike with technical stuff. But they're sort of the psychology in there, but I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't be able to write, I don't think, a credible psychological novel where you have somebody abused in childhood and seeking revenge on all sorts of people. I mean, yeah, there are things which happen in people's childhood they would want to seek revenge on, but actually working my mind into that sort of person's psyche, and then looking at the ramifications about how they act with other people who might be equally damaged in one way or the other, I'd find that much more of a challenge than having the police work out why someone's head is on a doorstep, or somebody actually saying, right, I'm going to get that person and this is how I'm going to do it via this method and this method and that method. So maybe I'm wandering off the point, but seriously disturbed people with mental illnesses, which I really don't want to make light of. That's another thing. I wouldn't want to exploit some of that. It's not the kind of thing I could write. I mean, I've read some very gripping novels like that. There was a Lisa Jewell one, which I read, which was very good. I used to read Jonathan Kellerman's novels back in the sort of 80s, 90s. I found the last couple I read just a bit too unnecessarily bloody, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, I haven't read any of his for a while, and they are good. I mean, he's a very good writer. His craft is terrific. So yeah, that's not the kind of area. That's the kind of weirdness I'm not really competent to write. But I can certainly write about someone who tortures people. Well, I don't go into a lot of details, but one of the characters in the book is known for torturing his enemies. I don't say exactly what he does, but it's implied, which in some respects is possibly more powerful.
Yeah, I think so. What's the most interesting thing you found out when doing your own research for your book?
One, I think it was part of the research for the crime science book, is that half the population can't smell bitter almonds in hydrogen cyanide. I mean, one of the cliches of some crime fiction, I mean, Agatha Christie tended to get things right, but people have followed on for her and twisted things a bit. Someone falls dead from swallowing potassium cyanide 5 seconds after drinking a glass of champagne with a chunk of KCN in it. And then somebody goes over and says, that's cyanide, bitter almonds. Well, there's a couple of things wrong with that. Generally, it takes 10 or 15 minutes for it to kill you because it's going to be absorbed through the stomach. Although there are some circumstances where you get vapors coming up and be inhaled. But if someone's been poisoned with cyanide, they're actually breathing the stuff out. It's not a very clever idea to go and take a hearty sniff of it. When pathologists do a post-mortem of someone who's suspected of taking a large dose of cyanide, they do it in a very special room with fume extraction and a respirator because they don't want to go the same way as the person on the table.
Yeah, definitely. That is interesting.
Anyway, the point is that half the population can't detect bitter almonds when they smell cyanide anyway. So that's probably the most unusual thing I've found out. But there are other things which you sort of take for granted, especially on the science side, and you quickly find out that they're wrong. For instance, most revolvers don't have a safety catch. There are a few models which do, but generally they rely on the fact it's a long pull and you maybe have to pull the hammer back before it will fire. And the Glock semi-automatics, which are ubiquitous in crime fiction and in the holsters of police officers, they don't generally have a safety catch either. So I see a lot of authors saying, he slipped the safety catch off his Glock and entered the room. Well, no, he wouldn't. There isn't one. And my favorite bugbear, I suppose, excuse me, is chloroform. It's a trope from crime fiction in the 1920s onwards, I think, that somebody comes up with a pad of cloth with chloroform on it, shoves it over someone's face, and they're instantly unconscious for the next hour or so. It doesn't work. To anesthetize somebody with chloroform for surgery, they had a special machine which delivers the right amount of chloroform and oxygen. It takes 15 minutes to get them fully under, and when you stop administering the chloroform, then they wake up very shortly afterwards. Linda Stratman has written an excellent book on chloroform called The Search of Oblivion, and that's well worth looking at. But there are so many people who still make these mistakes on TV and elsewhere. Yeah, I'm breathing a gulp of chloroform will make you dizzy and disoriented in time for someone to bang you on the head, maybe. But if it was that easy, I'd have been on the floor of the lab many a time when I was using the stuff.
The question I was going to ask you, actually, can you read and sort of try and ignore the mistakes, or do you just notice them?
I think it depends on how good the book is. I mean, I got picked up a proof at Harrogate, I think, of a novel by somebody who was writing about an artist involving in work murders, and she used chloroform in that. One of which she was chloroforming a rabbit, the artist was, so that she could do a painting of it. I think a painting or a sculpture, I can't remember which. And I was suspicious about that. And I had a word with our vet, and she said, "No, you don't do that. It'll kill it." And the other one is she talked about someone having been injected with chloroform to kill them. Well, that would be excruciatingly painful. And, you know, who's going to sit still while somebody pumps 10 mils of chloroform into your vein? So yeah, that made me annoyed. Okay, it was a proof copy, and maybe things were improved in the final one. But I mean, there are things you draw a veil over because the rest of it is so damn good. I think it's a Line of Duty, which is stunningly good drama, but they do a few silly things with firearms. In one episode, somebody gets shot through well, you've got a guy with a pistol hold to someone's head behind a glass door. And a police officer who wouldn't already be carrying a firearm anyway, shoots him through the glass door, hits the villain, but not the person who's got the pistol against his head. Well, if you fire through a piece of glass, anybody behind it is going to get covered in bits of glass, which is not good for your health. And secondly, the bullet could go almost anywhere. So that was just silly. But, you know, having said that, the series is so excellent. I still watch it and draw a veil over some of the mistakes like that. The same with The Killing, you know, no, not The Killing, The Bridge, beg your pardon. There were a few technical mistakes in that, but again, if you watch the acting and the plots in that, never mind a few mistakes, it's just so entertaining.
If you were to team up your main detective with another crime fiction detective, who would you like them to team up with?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you've got teams who are almost inseparable. You wouldn't separate Poe and Tilly in Mike Craven's books. They would, you know, they work together. They wouldn't do that. I think possibly Mel Cotton with Meave Kerrigan in Jane Casey's excellent books, because they're both competent, clever, brave women who just not going to take rubbish from anybody. So they might work together. I don't think there'd be a lot of particular friction there. Maybe Roy Grace, because Grace is good at encouraging other people's contributions and their work like that. So I think they could possibly work well together. She's a bit impulsive, but you know, she would follow his orders by and large, I think. So maybe that would work. I hadn't really thought of that before.
And if you were to be a character in any of the books, who would you be? And would you be a victim or would you be a copper?
I'd probably be one of the sort of backroom people, somebody doing something technical. Maybe a Socko, because I'm very good at finding things. If we've dropped anything, whether it's a bit of jewelry or a nut and bolt, I'm pretty good at finding things. So I'd be quite meticulous at a crime scene. So I could be one of those. I mean, Kate Benelow's just written an excellent book on about a Socko, and maybe her character there. Or one of the people behind the scenes doing computer stuff. I probably wouldn't be that good as a straightforward detective in terms of interviewing people, because I always think the best of people. I'd be far too gullible. So they'd probably pull the wool over my eyes. And if you look at the skills of the way people interview, you can see it on the true life crime stuff like 24 Hours in Police Custody. Then that would, you know, I would not be particularly good at that, I don't think, because I would accept what people say too often. And that's something which I remember seeing in the Scott and Bailey TV series, the way they were interviewing people. It was far more realistic than cough you, scrote, or we'll bang you up kind of old school police interrogation. So yeah, I think probably I'd be the sort of person who digs around in files and maybe makes connections and so on, putting random bits of information together to get a picture, rather than out there on the streets kicking down doors.
Like that, that's cool. Then 24 Hours in Police Custody set in my area.
Ah, right, yes, there's some good stuff there.
Yeah, the one with the young lads that stabbed each other. and there was blood in the shopping centre. I was at work that day.
Good grief. Eh? Shocking stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, didn't really realise at first. My young colleague said, "Is there blood out the front?" I said, "No, don't be silly. Of course it isn't." Yeah, from like one end of the shopping centre to halfway until they collapsed.
Oh,
yeah, rubbish witness.
Yeah, right. Well, witness statements are notoriously unreliable. And look at that. I was just looking at Crime Readers Association newsletter, and someone's written a book on Hanratty, the Hanratty murder. And for a long time, the journalist Ludovic Kennedy was trying to clear him because someone swore they'd seen him I think in Rhyl or somewhere miles from the A6. But when they did some DNA work, then yes, it was Hanratty, and he was not wrongly convicted. Whether he should have been hanged is another debate, but he'd done it. But, and somebody was clearly wrong about the alibi. So yes, they're often pretty unreliable.
Yeah, the police came up. I'm like, did you see anything? But we've got people, it's a shopping centre, people are coming and going all the time. I saw people running, and that's all I could tell them. I had nothing.
Yeah.
And it's annoying because I've studied forensics, so I know how important it is, but like, I've got nothing. Sorry.
Yeah.
And people were just walking over. They just stepped over the blood.
Brilliant. Just like Barnaby in Midsummer Murders, clambering all over the crime scene.
Yeah, I don't know if they just don't care or just used to it. I don't know. It was a very weird day. Yeah. I love where I come from. It's great. Totally distracted then. I guess from your sort of consultancy, you made lots of contacts, but have you subsequently made lots of friends through the authors that you've helped?
Well, I think online I seem to have lots of friends. I mean, I know Mike Craven fairly well. I helped him first time with working out whether a limb had been severed before or after death. And I did this sort of online, and then I met him at CrimeFest, and we had a chat there, and he'd actually checked it with one of the country's pathologists who said I got it right, which made me feel good. So we've been in touch, over the phone. So I guess over the internet. So I guess I'd call him a friend. And I know Lee Russell pretty well, because I've met her a few times and gave her a hand or something. So yeah, I've got lots of what you might call online friends and acquaintances. I work with Graham Bartlett and Kate Bendelow with these workshops, which we put on, I think, about twice a year. They're one-day workshops for crime writers. Kate does the scene of crime stuff, Graham does the piece procedure, and I do a session on scientific errors that people might get wrong. So I know them pretty well. Again, online, I've never met these people. And I was hoping to get up to Harrogate this year and actually meet some of these people. But unfortunately, my son, who's got learning disabilities and a heart problem, had a heart operation, a heart investigation planned. And no way was I going to jeopardize that by catching COVID in the bar at Harrogate. So I had to cancel, but I'll be there next year, assuming it's happening. And at CrimeFest. So it'll be nice to catch up with people in reality who I only know electronically.
Yeah, I made it to Harrogate for the first time and it was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah.
I met Mike because I've interviewed him. Yeah. So I spoke to him briefly, but yeah, it was amazing. I loved it. I'm going to Bloody Scotland actually next weekend as well.
Yeah. It's a long way from Weston-super-Mare, that's the trouble.
It's a long way from Dunstable as well, especially when they have a strike on the train on the Sunday, so you can't get home.
Oh, yeah, yes, that's right.
Yeah, we'll worry about that next weekend. It's fine. It's only 6 hours or something. It's fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it would be nice. Totally forgot. I keep getting distracted. It's terrible. Do you get many just general population of people contacting your crime readers or anything?
Not so much crime readers. I mean, I've got my email out there and contact details on the website, and people contact me via Messenger and Twitter and so on. No, it's only been crime writers so far. I haven't had any dodgy character contact me saying, how do I commit the perfect murder? Or I've got this body, I want to get rid of it. I've not had that kind of thing. But I have had people ask about body disposal. So yeah, quite a wide range of crime writers over the years. I think for the first time I actually did anything like this was for the BBC. There's a guy called David Kane who writes TV dramas. He's written some of the Taggart episodes and other sort of Scottish-based things. And he wrote a serial called Jute City back in that would have been in the early 90s, I think. And I was an environmental consultant at the time, and somebody who I knew who had some contacts in the media said that I might be able to help because the theme was toxic waste dumping in a quarry in Scotland. So I met him and had lunch and agreed to help with the script. And I ended up in the BBC headquarters in London, working out how to blow up a toxic waste tip, which was quite fun. Talking to the special effects guys, but you know, I just did that as an environmental consultant. But later on, you know, back in this century, I dropped Peter James an email because I read a passage in one of his books which I particularly liked. So a woman was being kept captive, and really took the initiative to try and get out and not be sort of coward, but she you know, put the boot in, as it were. And I thought that was good because you see far too many cases where so a woman in particular is just cowed and treated as an object. Well, this was somebody with spirit, so I like that. And I said, yeah, I do this. I'm a scientist, anything I can do to help. And he came back and asked how to knock somebody out with ketamine, which turned up in Love You Dead, was it? I can't remember which one because I'm not so good with his titles because they all got dead in them and I can't remember which one was which. But I got a credit in the back of the book for that. So that's the first thing I did. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe I could do more of this.
What's been your favourite moment so far since you started writing?
I think getting a offer of publication was pretty exciting. I mean, I was very pleased to see Crime Writing: How to Write the Science come out. But it's written as a book for crime writers and creative writing students. And it's not the kind of thing you'll see all over the place. And of course, with lockdown, which happened shortly after it was published, reps weren't going into colleges, students weren't going into colleges, and bookshops were closed. So that wasn't as widespread as I thought, but I was very pleased with it. But actually seeing Fatal Trade coming out, and you know, people have been saying some very nice things about it online, and the publisher has this advanced readers team who read it, and they all liked it. So that's very nice indeed to see that what you've done, you've crafted something which you think is okay, and people are saying really nice things about it.
And when you were editing, what was your most overused word or phrase that you had to keep getting rid of?
Villain, I think. Have to find different words for villain. This does smack a bit of the sort of Sweeney in the 70s on the TV, but yeah, you've got to try and do that. And I mean, language is a funny thing anyway, because you know you've got to try and keep up to date. I will be very hesitant writing about teenagers because their slang and ways of speaking seem to vary by the month. And you put somebody in and call them a skank in the book, by the time it's published, it's a completely different phrase. It's a word for that. So I'd be a bit cautious about writing for teens, especially when they're doing text speak and online abbreviations and so on. Some people do it well. I do like Cara Hunter's books where she has a lot of emails and press reports interspersed with narrative. I think that works really well. And, you know, she obviously looks into how people speak online and when they send emails and posts on social media. But I'd never keep up with a 14-year-old, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know what they're on about. No clue. When I went to uni, I was a mature student, and all my fellow students were 20. And in the group chat that we had, they were talking, and I'm like, "Do you lot come with a translator? What on earth are you talking about?"
Yes.
No clue.
Yeah.
I never did find out either, but I'm sure it was young people stuff that was,
Yeah.
yeah, bless them. Um, do you have any fears or phobias, and would you write about them?
I don't have any phobias. I tend to be pretty much a rationalist, which does sort of maybe inhibit my imagination sometimes. So I have to work hard on that. And you have fears about your children. Um, any parent would. I think if I was working as a police officer, I'd find it very hard to work on child protection because I want to be thoroughly unprofessional and do unpleasant things to the perpetrators. But I mean, the main fears of what might happen to your family, wife and children. So yeah, I don't think that would stop me writing about a family in peril, but that would be my main fears, I think. Apart from, of course, a general fear about the planet and the morons in charge of it in various countries, which I don't know if you do politics on this website, but maybe you better stay away from it. Suffice it to say that I do refer to some of the difficulties of policing in a time of austerity.
Yeah, it's something that I've found more personal since I've done my course, and how I see how difficult it is because of. So yeah, I get it.
I think forensic science is terribly underfunded. I think I'm not convinced that privatizing it is a good idea. I know one of the country's leading forensic scientists thinks it's a good idea, because Angela Gallup, I think it was. Others are less than happy. I think when they dismantled some of the false forensic science labs, they lost a huge amount of expertise and a lot of records. I mean, you know, we solve cold cases, and I came across one in our local paper last week or the week before, a cold case, a rape, which was solved by DNA 40 years after it happened. And they got the guy, you know, the victim was long dead, but they got him. But you know, where is all this evidence? You know, has it been lost? Have the records gone? It's a scandal if it's lost. So yeah, it does worry me about the if someone gets away with a crime, it's not going to be because the police aren't good enough. It's because the forensic science has been underfunded to chase them, which is a very sad reflection, really.
Yeah, the three main lecturers I had at uni, one was an ex-drugs forensic scientist, one was an I think geneticist, or she dealt with blood and DNA, and the other one was an entomologist. And I know entomologists are rare anyway, but now she's working in a university in Luton. So it's such a shame.
I came across something in a forensic science bulletin. There's an issue of the journal Insect, which has now been put free for people to get hold of on the internet, looking at various aspects of forensic entomology, which looks quite a good read if you're into that.
Yeah, that's what I've done my dissertation on.
Ah, great. Oh, well, you probably know more than they do.
Not guaranteed. It was interesting, though. They are interesting.
I did have to do, I was an external examiner for an environmental science degree in University of Gloucester, and they had to choose an ecosystem to describe how it, you get a piece of land and different plants following what they call a succession. And somebody had some sort of contact with a forensic lab in Chepstow, and his dissertation was on the ecosystem of a decomposing corpse. And it was absolutely fascinating how the various organisms move in and then are succeeded by others and so on. And it fitted perfectly the assignment criteria, but it just wasn't talking about 20 hectares of scrub. It was talking about something much smaller, and it worked.
Yeah, it is. People just wouldn't have a clue. I don't think it's gross, but it is really fascinating.
Yeah.
If you were able to spend a day with any author, dead or alive, who would you like to spend a day with?
Well, a day in the pub with Mike Craven would be pretty good. But I tell you who I would find fascinating to talk to, and that's R. Austin Freeman. He wrote the Dr. Thorndyke stories back at the turn of the century, more or less a contemporary of Conan Doyle. But he had a lot more science in them. And I remember reading them. I think I first read them when I was about 12, and came across a copy of the collected short stories in an antique shop where it was just propped up as a prop on a bookcase. So I bought the book rather than the bookcase, and really got into it again. And I collected all the other Thorndike novels, and they are very good for their time. When a lot of things were just evolving, but he had his technician in his lab, and he wasn't doing sort of 87 types of tobacco ash. He was doing much more credible things. And as a character, I think I preferred him to Sherlock Holmes. And I like Sherlock Holmes, obviously, but having a chat with R. Austin Freeman about how he got some of his plots and ideas, that would be quite interesting. So that's the dead one. But the alive one, there are plenty I'd love to have a chat with.
And who would be one that you'd be most overawed to meet?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose if you look at someone with the track record of someone like Ian Rankin, but he's a nice guy. You can have a pint with him, and this is what I found about Crime Fest. Nobody is put themselves on a pedestal. They'll talk to you, and they'll have a chat, and it's not like you're talking to, I don't know, a Nobel Prize winner whose scientific language and credentials are going to be way above your own. It's not that kind of thing. If you're talking to someone like, I don't know, Alec Jeffreys, who pioneered DNA profiling, that would be quite an interesting experience. But then academics are on a different plane. Crime writers, I found really approachable. And they'd probably be quite offended if you thought you were overawed in that. Certainly some of them would be.
Yeah, I think some of them would quite like it. Yeah, bless them.
I was told by somebody mentioned at Crime Fest, I think, that crime writers are very collegiate, whereas romantic novelists are always stabbing each other in the back. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was an interesting thought.
Yeah, I've heard that, but apparently that's not true. But yeah, crime writers are lovely, absolutely amazing, and really giving with their time, I find, which is really nice.
I think I might have been overawed a bit by Terry Pratchett because he was such a genius. I didn't want to speak to him when he was a PR officer for 4 nuclear power stations, but that was from my Friends of the Earth hat, asking why some of these things had cracked and why they were still being run. But that was a long time ago, before he was famous. But
that's pretty cool, though.
Yeah.
He's a very popular choice of who people would like to spend a day with. So
yes,
pretty cool.
Yes, he's absolute genius.
What do you like to do in your free time when you're not writing?
Reading. We've got a Victorian house which we've been doing up, and we're having to still do maintenance and repairs and so on. So when it was hot, I was trying to mend windows, and my wife was painting it. I wouldn't say I actually enjoy it. It's just one of these necessities, but I do like the countryside. I monitor butterflies for butterfly conservation and send in a report every year for what I've seen. But of course, with lockdown, travel's a bit difficult. One thing we do like doing is staying in old buildings run by the Landmark Trust. They're ancient things, from Scottish castles to the last one was a small smuggler's tower on the south coast looking out over the Solent. And they do up these buildings, put in some heating and some modern conveniences, although not turning it into a sort of Premier Inn or anything. But what you pay for is the history, the delightful features of the building which have been preserved or renovated, and the cost of your sort of hire goes to renovate more buildings. So they've got some lovely places around the country, which sometime we stayed in with the whole family and had a sort of family celebration, wedding anniversary. There was a fort in Pembrokeshire. Sometimes you just go off on our own to a bathhouse in Warwickshire or this little tower in Hampshire. So yeah, we like doing that sort of thing.
That's awesome. Totally checking that out when we finish.
Yeah, oh yes, indeed. They're not cheap, but the money's going to a good cause, and actually seeing some of these fantastic buildings being renovated and restored is a privilege.
Yeah. Which leads me to one of my favourite questions. If you're able to travel to any period in time, either forwards or backwards, where would you like to go to?
Probably San Francisco in 1967 to catch the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and the Quicksilver Messenger Service. One of my great disappointments was going to the Bath and West Festival in 1970, where the Jefferson Airplane were scheduled to play, and it rained, and one of the guitarists had been nearly electrocuted in Germany when it was raining on the equipment, so they didn't play. Led Zeppelin just played on regardless in the pouring rain. So I think some of his, I was a bit too young. I lived in London in the 60s and early 70s, but I was just too young to go to some of these concerts and gigs like UFO and the Pink Floyd and some of the early Fairport Convention stuff. So I would like to go back and see some of these performances and things which you just hear about, legendary performances. I did see Hendrix at the Isle of Wight, and that's a long abiding memory. But yeah, go back a few years before that, London and San Francisco, I think I would like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's what I'd like to do as well. I was born in 83, so I just missed like all the big names were around as I was born, so obviously it was too late by the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. To see Live Aid, to see Queen, Prince, David Bowie, all of those would be just amazing.
I saw David Bowie a few times. I ended up drinking whiskey in his dressing room at one point. He did a charity gig for Save the Whale for Friends of the Earth. And he agreed to do it just before Ziggy Stardust came out, and he really became very famous. So the festival hall was absolutely packed. And for some reason, I was with the Friends of the Earth people, and we ended up in this room. And somebody said, "Oh, this was David Bowie's dressing room," and there was a bottle of whiskey there, so we helped ourselves. But yeah, he was a terrific performer. I saw him several times.
Amazing. I'm not jealous at all. It's fine. I saw his performance at Live Aid, and you could tell that he loved it. You can tell the singers that are doing it because it's what they do, and there's the ones that do it because that's what they were meant to do. That's their passion, and he was one, I think.
Yeah.
If you were to have a superhero power, what would you choose?
Don't know. Maybe to go without sleep, without feeling ill. That would be useful. I could write more then. Flight would be obviously interesting because I quite like being above the ground. My wife bought me a birthday present, which was a flight in a Tiger Moth from Gloucester Airport, which was great, flying around in that thing. They let me take control as well, which is great. So yeah, maybe flying would be fun, but I think my aspirations are modest.
And if you were to be stranded on a desert island, what 3 things would you want with you?
Well, are we talking practical or are we talking about idyllic? I mean, practical things would be a water purification unit because you can't drink seawater, and some means of producing food. If you're talking about being somewhere where you've got a lot of leisure and your needs are met, then obviously a word processor and plenty of and a solar charger to keep it going. That will be fairly good. And you know, some books, maybe a Kindle full of some of my favorite authors would keep me going. There are lots of things I want to reread. I want to reread a lot of Terry Pratchett. I want to reread Philip Pullman's Dark Materials books, and a lot of crime things, which, you know, certainly benefit rereading.
Yeah, I know. I'd love to reread as well. I just don't have time.
Yeah. Well, there's so much good stuff coming out, you know. You can't afford to go back. You don't want to miss things.
I know.
People
Yeah,
keep writing books, you know. I mean,
I know. We need a hiatus of maybe a month or 2 every year of just no authors bring out any books, so we can all catch up on our TBRs and then we can go again. And
yeah, it's a very big TBR.
Yeah. I know. I'm on so many ARC teams, so I just read ARCs generally. I don't read anything else. I just read the next ARC.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't mind. I love it, but yeah, it just feels never ended.
I get a few, but sometimes you have to put down everything else. I mean, when the last Christopher Fowler Bryant May book came out, I had to sort of stop everything and read that because I love his work. I love the humour, the characterisation, the plots, and the bits of old London, because I keep reading stuff. And, well, yeah, I grew up in London, but I don't know about that. I'd quite like to go and have a nose around there, you know. So, yeah, I think he's great.
Yeah, I do that for Mike Craven.
Not
that his head's big enough already. Bless him. So are you working on anything at the moment, and then do you know what you're going to do next?
Yeah, I'm working on the sequel to Fatal Trade. It involves, again, Mel Cotton and her colleagues in Mexton CID. It involves, let's see, what can I say without giving things away? A couple of dodgy politicians, terrorists, a very boring man who for some reason is found murdered. Yeah, I don't want to say an awful lot more about it, but it's going to the publishers for their approval, which I hope they'll approve, in a couple of weeks. And we're hoping to have it out in Easter, because what there will be in there is, I hope, a lot of Easter eggs. Little cultural references, like in the Endeavour series, for instance, there was a signpost in the countryside pointing to Midwich, and Fred Thursday paraphrases some of the Dirty Harry speech about, you know, did I fire 5 or 6, that kind of thing. And there's lots of other delightful little things in there. There's an interesting piece in the Radio Times about the new series about that. So there'll be quite a few Easter eggs, I hope, and maybe a competition to see who spots them. And after that, I've also got, that one is coming up quite nicely. It's got a few more weeks work on it, but it's going to them soon. And the third novel will be about a serial poisoner, because poisons are something I've looked at quite a lot, and that will intrigue people. I think it'll be a bit more, I suppose, of a mystery of who done it, but there'll have to be more than that, because you need more than one thread. Police officers work on several things at the time quite often. That was one of the things I liked about the Frost TV series and the books. It wasn't just one case and that, because there are all sorts of other fiddly things. You may be looking at a murder, but there could be robberies and thefts and all sorts of other things, blackmail, you know, all of which makes a police officer's life, especially if you've got a rank like inspector, a lot to do. It gives you a lot to do. It's not just a question of working on one case and nothing else. I mean, obviously, if there's a big murder or something, then you will have a dedicated team doing that. But the police station itself will have lots of other things going on at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you may be relieved to know that I don't have any more questions for you, unless you think there's anything I haven't asked you that you want to tell us.
No, I don't think so. I mean, if any, people might like to subscribe to my newsletter, which will give details of what I'm writing, and also some forensic tips, which I've picked up from various places, which might be of interest both to readers and to writers. You can get it through my website, brianpriceauthor.co.uk, and just subscribe, and I'll send it out. There's an issue coming out on Sunday night, which will be my first one, and I'd be very interested to know what people think of it. And then I'll bring it out as and when. There'll be another one before Christmas, I think. And Hobeck Books are producing a charity anthology around Christmas, and I've got a story coming out in that. So that should be fun for someone.
Fabulous. And would you like to just remind everyone where they can find out more about you and where they can get your books from?
Yeah, well, you can order Fatal Trade as a paperback from Waterstones and independent bookshops and so on. It's also available as an ebook on Amazon, which you can pre-order now. And apparently publishers like pre-orders. So if you are intrigued, you can go and do that. Just Google or search for Fatal Trade. My author website is brianpriceauthor.co.uk. And if you want tips on science and crime writing, then it's crimewriterscience.co.uk.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Donna.